All right. Good afternoon, good people. You can say hi. I know the technology makes things a little bit different these days, but we're going to take advantage of it and make the most of it. My name is Dr. H. Bernard Hall, but you can call me Bernard. I'm joined here by my co-hosts.
I'm Brayden.
And
I'm Noah.
And my executive producer, Miss Natay Hall. She's waving. And we really appreciate y'all coming and sitting down with us today. We are sitting at our dinner table. And in our house, anytime we're sitting at the dinner table and there's no food on that dinner table, that means we got some real ish to talk about. Okay, and I see some of you gathered around in your living rooms, the TV's off, right? The iPads are away, unless you're viewing us on one, right? And that means that you know that there's something serious going on as well, right? And this is the second episode in a series of Zoom meetings called Kids, We Gotta Talk, right? And in that title, it says kids, most certainly, right? But the conversation that we're going to have today is also directed to the parents, right? And the serious stuff that we need to talk about today centers on topics of race and racism. Right? And before we get started, I want to be the first to acknowledge that having conversations like these are tough, right? To put it simple, right? It's tough, right? In many ways, I do this for my job, right? My primary job is as a teacher educator. So my job is to teach teachers how to teach, right? And when I'm working with 19 to 22-year-olds, it's tough, right? When I'm doing professional development with experienced teachers, right? Folks my age, I'm 40, right? It's tough, right? And when it comes to working with young people, right, like the bulk of you, right, ages 9-ish to 13-ish, right, it's even tougher, right? And why is that? Because my number one job as a parent is to keep my kids safe, right? It's to protect them, right? And sometimes as parents, our job is to tell you about some scary and uncomfortable things, knowing that in the immediate moment, right, it might make you sad, it might make you angry, it might make you feel guilty, right? But in the long run, it's gonna help make you safer because you know what to keep your eye out for. You know when to duck, right? You know when to get the heck up out of there, and oftentimes when you need to speak up, right? So, with that said, again, I want to remind you that kids is in the title of this conversation, right? And that your voice is valuable, right? Your voice, if you're 10 years old, is just as important to hear and just as much value as that old person sitting next to you, all right? Deal? Can I get a thumbs up from everybody? Awesome, okay? Now, I am a teacher and I have some tools that are going to help us have this conversation. Okay, and just as you know, this will be recorded, so don't feel like you need to have a pencil and paper out. If you do, that's great. And yes, there will be some homework at the end of this conversation. All right? No complaining. I know some of y'all just got out of school last week, but yes, there will be homework. Okay, and yes, your parents are going to have to do it too. Okay? So, let me share this screen with you. So the title of today's conversation, as we said, is Kids, We Gotta Talk, right? And the topic for today's conversation is gonna center on this idea of the dangers of colorblindness, okay? And as we go about, you will have an understanding of what I mean by danger, right? And how, once we recognize the danger, we can develop some tools and some behaviors right, to overcome the fears that come with that danger. Okay? So we're going to begin with a quote, right, from one of the from a text that I found very helpful in helping me begin and lead conversations on race and racism. And it comes from an author named Oluo. And the title of her book is So You Want to Talk About Race? My co-host Noah, will you help us out?
We have to be able to look racism in the eye whenever we encounter it. If we continue to treat racism like a giant monster that is chasing us, we will be forever running. But running won't help us when it's in our workplace, our government, our homes, and ourselves.
Now, fellas, looking at this quote, are there any particular words or ideas that jump out to you that you find confusing? Go ahead, B.
I found a part that says, like it's a giant monster. And I thought that kind of meant that if you see a giant monster, you're not going to want to walk right up to it. You're going to want to be running away from it and not going near it. So I think by the giant monster, it means the racism and the different hard things that come with it.
Right. It's an analogy, right? It's a simile that racism sometimes feels like it's a giant monster, right? I'm pretty sure that everybody sitting around this table in your living room right now, if a giant monster ran into the room, you wouldn't be in that room anymore. Right? Of course not. Right? And part of what this conversation is designed to do is to make that monster a little less scary. Okay? That's what we want to do. We want to make it a little less scary. All right? No, anything else jump out to you in this quote about where this, especially about where this monster is?
Well, it says that like how it's in our workplace, our government, our homes, and inside people. So it's like you can't really go anywhere. It's like if there was a monster somewhere and it's like in every single place, you can't run from it. You have to like address it.
You got to address it, right? And yes, I'm sorry, young people, right? You're lucky you don't have to go to a workplace yet, right? But your primary workplace is where? School, right? I know the various parents here, we work in different kind of places, right? I know we got doctors here, we got lawyers, we got teachers, we got folks of all different kind of professions, right? And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, right? Well, that's the problem, right? Is that we need to acknowledge that these monsters are in these rooms. They're in these spaces. And yes, they're inside of us as well, right? And the first and most important step is being able to identify those monsters in the room and within ourselves. And yes, sometimes that's going to, almost always, not sometimes, almost always, that's going to come with some moments of uncomfortability, right? When we recognize that, yes, even the best of us, right, there are some aspects and elements of racism within us, right? But once we can identify them, right, we can make them a little less scary, right, and change those places. So, to this first question, why don't we talk about race? Right? And in my work, there's typically 3 answers to this question, right? And frankly, these answers come from a good place, right? This question of, I don't see race, or this response, I don't see race, right? Largely that comes from a good place. Most of us, most of the parents here, right? Or maybe I should just use myself. Like I said, I'm 40 years old, right? My parents were born in 1946 and 1949, right? I'm assuming that most of your parents around in that same neighborhood, right? Even though sometimes you can't tell. That's another topic. But our our parents grew up in a different America, right? One where these giant monsters called racism were much more conspicuous, right? They were much more out in the open, right? And people learned from the lesson, right? They said, you know what, this racism thing is bad, right? I want to treat everyone like they're equal. That makes sense. Would we agree?
Yeah.
Right? But in this case, the reaction to the racism that people lived with and saw in the 1960s and the 1970s and in the 1980s, right, led to an overreaction, right? And this overreaction didn't make the monster go away, right? We just put blinders onto it, right? And again, like if you ever watching a scary movie or a movie that you shouldn't be watching, right? You put your eyes on, right? But the movie doesn't go off, right? The movie is still there, right? And again, I know why people said, I don't see race, or I teach my kids not to see race, or I don't want you to see your classmates as black or brown, right? You just I want you to see them as kids. I understand where that comes from. But again, not seeing race does not make race and racism go away. Okay? We're going to continue to talk about that here in a moment, right? And the reason, and I'm going to point to this last bullet point on here, is I don't want to make a mistake, right? Let me tell you a little secret, kids. Your parents, I'm going to mess some of y'all parents up with this, right? Your parents don't know the answer to every question. I know it's crazy. I know we act like it all the time, right? But sometimes we don't have the answer to every question, right? And they're good people. And talking about this race stuff is difficult. The language in and of itself is difficult, right? Do you refer to me as Black or African American? Right? Can be difficult. I want you to know, in my book, the terms could be used interchangeably. I identify myself as a Black American. Why don't I use the term African? Because the institution of slavery has disconnected me from any cultural connections to the continent of Africa, aside from the pigment of my skin. So I use the term Black, okay? Other people use the term African American. As far as I'm concerned, you can use them interchangeably, right? But when it comes to this monster called, or these monsters called race and racism, right? I need the parents here to understand that the crimes of inaction are just as serious as the crimes of action, right? So if you're going to make a mistake, I ask, I hope, I pray that you make a proactive mistake rather than a reactive mistake, right? Knowing that the consequences could result in your kid being one of these kids that we have pictured on the screen, right? And I know you don't want to make a mistake like that. Why? Because you're sitting here trusting a dude like me to have a conversation like this with you and your family. So, why is colorblindness dangerous? And I stole this quote from Twitter, and good teachers steal a lot of good stuff, and I'll admit that, right? And this post for Twitter says, answers the question of why colorblindness is dangerous, right? In very direct words. I don't see race as essentially saying, I don't see the uniqueness of your experience and the potential difficulties you face. Also, I am a liar. I'm gonna let you chew on that, and I apologize for my screen being in the way of part of that quote. Right? I don't see race as essentially saying, I don't see the uniqueness of your experience and the potential difficulties you face. Also, I'm a liar. Right? So what if I said that I don't see gender? And again, I treat all the women that I work with as equals. They can do every aspect of the job that I can do, they can do oftentimes better. Right? But not seeing their gender and the uniqueness of their experience and the difficulties faced is unfair. I am lying to myself, right? If I don't recognize that every woman on this job, on this screen right now, on this conversation, had internal and external conversations about the cost benefits, right, of starting a family. Every single one. Right? Not recognizing the differences that come with gender means that I don't take into account that more than likely, sadly, half of the women or more on this conversation right now have been sexually assaulted. How can I ignore those parts of their experience? What is also uncomfortable about this, right, is that it also raises into question, while it raises into question the potential difficulties that I have faced, it also raises the potential privileges that you enjoy. That you enjoy, excuse my assumptions, you enjoy the fact that you walk outside of your house and chances are 90% of the people in your neighborhood or more look like you. The privileges that you enjoy about sending your kids to school, knowing that there's almost a 90% certainty that the teacher is going to look like them. And in many cases, I had some of my students say, well, Doc, man, I don't see you as a Black professor. I just see you as a professor. My first response is, thank you. And then I ask them, think about the other Black men that you're going to see on campus today. And I'd be willing to bet cash money that 95% of the Black men that you see on campus are there to serve you food and to clean your bathroom. And again, I say that with directing no shame to those people who are working hard to take care of their families. But the bottom line is that even at Westchester University, there are 10, or probably 25 to 30 Black men who are there to clean up after you, right? Or to feed you food as opposed to feeding you knowledge. And to not see that, to not recognize that, means that you're lying to yourself, right? And we have to stop lying to ourselves. I do see some questions. So somebody asked me to go back and explain what's going on in these pictures. Can I come back? I'm going to come back and explain that in a second, okay? So, after May 25th, not too long ago, right? But after May 25th, the people who are sitting next to you right now, the people who are here on this conversation, and a lot of other folks, decided it was time to stop running. It was time to stop being silent, and it was time to stop lying to ourselves. Now, I know that different people have been exposed to different amounts of information, right? So in the next couple slides, you are going to see some things that maybe you have seen before, maybe you have not. If you haven't seen them before, know that that is because your folks have been trying to protect you. And again, I began this by telling you that this is our number one job, right? But this is going to be one of those instances where we're going to have to make you a little bit uncomfortable. We're going to have to make you a lot of bit uncomfortable and probably a little bit sad so that you can understand the gravity of the situation and what is going on in this country of ours right now. Okay. What happened on May 25th? On May 25th in Minneapolis, Minnesota, this gentleman by the name of George Floyd was arrested for allegedly using or attempting to use a counterfeit or fake $20 bill in a store. Tried to use a fake $20 bill in the store. The store owners called the police on him. He was put in handcuffs. And he engaged in what I would call passive resistance. Right? He did not try to punch anybody. He did not try to kick anybody. He pulled a technique that some of you pulled when you were 4 or 5 years old, when you drop to your legs, all of a sudden your legs don't work, right? And you get dragged through the mall. That's another story for another time, right? But again, I use the words passively resisting. He was unarmed. He did not have a gun on him. He did not have a knife on him. He did not try to bite anybody. He did not try to spit on anybody, right? He was, at worst, passively resisting. And this happens. Now, that was not a super pregnant pause, and my computer did not glitch. Right? I remained silent for 60 seconds. And why did I do that? Because I wanted you to feel how long 60 seconds takes. Perhaps, maybe just once or twice, maybe you've been sent to your room for 15 minutes, for 30 minutes, maybe for an hour. No one on this call would ever get sent to their room for an hour, right? But there are some moments when time flies. Right? When a 2.5-hour baseball game goes like that.
if you're playing sports outside, it goes kind of quick.
Right? When you're playing Madden, right? You can lose 2 hours like that. That officer's knee was on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. He was completely unresponsive, completely silent, and not moving for the last 4 minutes. After his so-called fellow officers had checked Mr. Floyd's pulse and told him that his heart wasn't beating anymore, or they could not find a pulse in his wrist anymore, he remained on his neck for an additional 2 minutes. During those 4 minutes where he was conscious, he pleaded for his life. I can't breathe. Please, the knee in my neck, if there was any question about what he was doing. I give up. Don't kill me. And the word that hurt me the most, just like you would, this 46-year-old man called for his mama. I'd like to open the floor. What goes through your mind, young people, old people, when you see these images, when you read these words, when you see these numbers? And one-word answers are just fine. Unmute yourself if you would like to speak.
I was wondering what was like going through his mind and what was like he trying to get out of doing that. Like, was he just like trying to stop him from doing it, or was he trying to intentionally kill him? Like, what was he trying to get out of doing that, kneeling on his neck?
And that's a great question, right? What was he trying to do, right? And again, the crazy thing here is that you're using logic, right? Like, everybody on this screen knows that this is arguably the most fragile part of your body, right? What could you possibly be looking to accomplish by doing what he is doing? Right? Thank you for that contribution. Other reactions?
He could have just arrested him instead of killed him.
He could have just arrested him. He's in handcuffs. He could have just done his job.
Why would he keep his knee on his neck even though he knew he's dead for 2 minutes?
And thank you, young sir. And here's a situation where I can't answer. I can't answer that question because I have a heart, and soul. And the only way that you hear that information and continue to do what you're doing with your hands in your pocket, right, is that you lack a heart and or a soul. Thank you for that contribution, young man. Other reactions, questions? Now, again, this is part of the problem. That here I just heard 12, 13, 11-year-old people using more logic and more compassion than a trained professional.
I think of that man calling out for his mother. And as a mother, I think of my boys calling out for me. And I wish his mother could have helped him as I would help my boys, as I would help anyone in that position. So that moment crushes me.
Thank you for sharing.
I have a hard time seeing how casual the police officer is just out in the open doing that. And he seems completely relaxed, like it's no big deal.
Something about that hand in the pocket.
It almost makes it look like he's been trained to do that and he's done it before.
And that's scary to think about, right?
Yeah.
Right. Now, this moment was captured. There's 7 minutes worth of video that captures this incident, and I'm not going to show that to you. But another part that is really disturbing is that his partner is standing directly in front of the person, the teenager, who is recording the incident. And the bystanders are screaming, "Yo, you're killing him. Yo, he's complying. Yo, he gave up. Yo, you're on his neck. Yo." And his partner does not turn around. He is threatening the bystanders on what will happen to them if they step from off the sidewalk into the street. Let's see a couple comments up here. Tanisha and her family says, her children's thoughts, that officer is a horrible person and thinks it was to prevent any CPR, make it truly murder. The other police are standing by doing nothing. A says it just hurts. Makes me, mom, sick to my stomach. Agreed, as a mother, it is incomprehensible. It almost looks like he's enjoying it. Now, one of the hardest parts about this incident, and one of the things that makes it most difficult to talk about, is that many of us know and love police officers. My father, a black man, is a retired Michigan State police officer, 22 years. And these folks got one of the hardest jobs in the world. One of the most unappreciated jobs in the world, right? They're kind of like baseball umpires, right? There's a saying that you don't know an umpire or referee's name until he messed something up really, 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 really bad, right? And in some ways, that's true, right? And while I have been taught to respect police officers, right? And Lord knows that if my wife and children were in a car accident, right, I want the police to help them. But it was my father, it was also my father who reminded me in his sayings, and it's crazy how things he used to say that you rolled your eyes at. Now you're like, yeah, he was right about that. He used to say, don't forget, policemen put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you. And what did he mean by that? He meant that whatever biases, whatever shortcomings as a person that person has at home or regular walking around the street, when you put that uniform on, those things don't go away. And sadly, and what's scary, when you give that person a gun and a badge, sometimes they come out even more. Now,
Bernard, did you want to go back to the images at the front now, or are you going to go back to those later?
thank you to the executive producer. What we would do without her, all right? So these pictures that you saw earlier, right, are white male teenagers who are mocking the death of George Floyd. This is funny to them. Yes, sir.
It's also called a George Floyd challenge, and when something's called a challenge on social media, it's often like a lot of people doing it, and it's something that like is made for people to have fun doing.
Now, I'm going to confess. I, like the people sitting next to you, the old people sitting next to you, we were teenagers once. And we did a lot of dumb stuff. A lot of it. And I'm going to tell you about, I was going to say a lot, some of it. Right? Because I don't want you to be as stupid as I was. Right? But this ain't funny. And in the era of social media, and I thank the Lord just about every other day that I wasn't 16 years old with social media in my pocket, Lord knows. But people think this is funny. And again, I don't know if this is a handful or a bucket full or a pool full or a city full of people. But some people think that this is funny.
This person right there in the bottom left is he's mimicking the police officer.
Hands in pockets and all, right? Right? So, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, right? But these are one of our biggest fears as parents, right? Is what happens when you make private silliness public, right? It scares me to death to think about, and again, these are relatively small things, right? Like I tripped and fell in the middle of the hallway. Books fly everywhere, right? Everybody in that hallway got a chance to laugh at me, right? But it was those folks in that hallway. And did it stink to have to go back that hallway the next time? Absolutely, right? But it didn't go to the whole world, right? I can admit I have made fun of the person who's fallen down, or I have made fun of the person whose outfit didn't meet my standards. But the idea of mocking a man's murder and sharing that with the world scares the hell out of me. I'm sorry, that word is the perfect word. It scares the hell out of me that there are young people that think this is funny. And I need you to know that your parents don't think that any part of this is funny. That a posting like this, merely hitting the like button on a post like this, could derail your life. And that's what you're seeing now, right? Is that a bunch of people who've liked racist things, right? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, who said racist things on Twitter 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Now those things are coming back, and now they have to explain. And guess what? They use some excuse of, well, I was a teenager and I was stupid. I'm sorry, but if you were saying racist stuff, I want to use a different word, when you're saying and doing racist stuff at 15, chances are you're still thinking and doing racist stuff at 22 and at 32. Okay? We need you to think before you act, and need you to really think hard about what you think is funny. Now, scary thing about race and racism, right, is that once you learn how to see it, right, you're going to find it. And one of the differences and one of the privileges that some of you enjoy, right, and some of the problem is that I am sure, or what you see on the screen right now are called the 4 levels of racism, right? That there are levels to this, right? And I'm pretty sure that if you haven't had this conversation yet, or if you have had this conversation, chances are you have touched on the internalized and interpersonal forms of racism exhibited here. We've already done that, right? That officer, right, did not value that man's life. That officer did not see a human being when he was choking the life out of him for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Right? We got that, check. Right? We got the interpersonal. And most of the time we think about this in terms of language. Right? What words to use, right? This goes well beyond that, right, to actions. Again, he choked that man or caused him to have a heart attack and die. Right? Now, one of the differences, right, is that in our house, right, we're having a deeper conversation. And I'm willing to bet that everybody here, right, identifies the internalized and interpersonal racism that led to the death of George Floyd. The harder part, and it's hard because when we think about racism operating on cultural and institutional or systemic levels, it raises questions about privileges that we enjoy. Right? So this third level of racism is cultural racism. Right? It is the notion that European American or white notions of knowledge, beauty, and truth, right, are superior. Right? You go to school. Your school, regardless if you live around the block or around the country from me, your school is rooted in European American or white notions of knowledge. And again, if you don't acknowledge that, you are lying to yourself. Right? The class that you teach or that you take with authors who look like me or my wife, right, is an elective. In most cases. Right? It brings up notions of beauty. I'll share an example of an instance where I negotiated cultural racism. Right? 2000, I'm an intern in in a smaller part of Ford Motor Company in my home state of Michigan. I was working in some form of sales, and I was good at it. And I had my end of the year evaluation, and my boss shows me the numbers. I'm 21 years old, and I'm outselling my 28 and 34 or 43-year-old counterparts, because I can run my mouth a little bit. And he says, you know what, Bernard? next year, come back, get your diploma, get a haircut, and I'm gonna have a job for you. And I got in my car, and he gave me a bonus. Right? I'm a teacher, I don't give a bonus, what's that, right? I got in my car, and I'm dancing, you know, when you get extra money, I don't know that feeling anymore, but I got a little extra money in my pocket, I got a pat on the back for a job well done. And then I was like, hold on a second. And again, now I got this much hair. In 2001, I would have had that much hair, right? But that was cultural racism, right? Under the guise of something called professionalism, that this person could sit across the table from me and look me in my face, acknowledge that I'm doing my job best, but in order for me to really work for him, I would have to cut my hair. And some of you are saying, well, it's only hair. This is going to be really uncomfortable. But do you know that once upon a time during the institution of slavery, that a slave's value would be judged by the ease for which a white man could put their hand through a black person's head? What? I saw that reaction. What? Yes. This is not a hairstyle as much as it is a symbol of my racial and cultural identity. And yes, executives in high places can look black people in the face under the guise of looking unprofessional, i.e. not looking white, and expect you to follow their rules or go kick rocks. That in order for me to join that club as a full-time member, I had to sacrifice a piece of myself to get back in that door. That is an example of cultural racism. Right? Now, an example of cultural truth is that the police are here to protect us. And I wish that I could say different, but my lived, and again, I was raised by a police officer, right? But my cultural truth, and people who look like me, unfortunately, largely is that the police do not protect and serve. And that I must teach my children at the same time, I gotta talk out of both sides of my face when I tell them that yes, you need to respect the police, but as NWA said, F the police. I'll let your parents explain what I just said. That I can't send my kids into this world thinking that the police are going to protect and serve them. Why? Because when I was 11 years old, I watched Rodney King on TV with my mom and dad. And my dad sat there and we watched this man get hit 50-something times with batons and fists and kicks. And my dad said, I remember clear as day, them bastards going to jail. And they didn't. And it was on TV. And it was a miracle because in 1992, a video camera cost like $2,500. It was a miracle that was captured, and we finally captured because we've been saying these things since 1960-something. And the guy still didn't get convicted. So we see the world through different lenses. And the truth is that the police may work for you. But my individual and collective experience as a Black person in this country says something very different. The last level is called institutional or systemic racism. And this is discriminatory treatment, laws, practices, and access. And this is the part that, according to certain news agencies like Fox News, right? According to them, I'm making this up. According to them, guys like the person who killed George Floyd are bad apples. People with my view of the world argue, no, there are bad trees. So, here I've listed some of the most prevalent forms of institutional racism, right? And again, yes, things have gotten better. No one here is denying that, right? They also hear people say, well, I didn't, and no one alive now would own slaves, right? Everything is different, right? But we can point to some very specific policies that took place a long time ago that continue to reap benefits for some people today. And one of them is called the GI Bill. Right? Any historian would point to the GI Bill post-World War II, that this policy that basically said, hey, if you fought in World War II, when you come home, we are going to acknowledge your service to this country, and we are essentially going to give you a house. Kids, houses are expensive. Okay? Take it from us. They are expensive. For me to get the home that I have, my wife and I both work full time. Both of us make more money than 80% of the people in this country. And for us to get this house, we had to borrow money from our parents because we don't have 20% of X $100,000 laying around. Okay, and yes, I talk to my kids about how much money we make. Why? So they can be aware of their privilege. And, and how we are grinding or how much we still got to grind. Right? So these people were given the house for free. Now, black people and white people and brown people fought in World War II. Say that louder and prouder.
Let me guess. They only gave it to the white people.
Ding, 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 ding. They only gave it to white people. So, what does this mean? This meant that many of your grandfathers performed their service. They came home, their service was rewarded, which I agree with. But only certain people got the rewards. And what happens when you buy a house for zero money down? How much money do you make when you sell it?
Like, as much as the house costs.
All of it.
Yeah.
Right? I only, folks, kids, like every month we pay our mortgages, right? We own a little bit more of our house, a little bit more of our house, a little bit more, right? And then after 30 years, oh Lord, right? We'll own all of it. So again, that creates what we call intergenerational wealth, right? That they could sell that house, more of that money goes into their pockets, right? And again, that wealth is passed down through generations, right? We had something called the war on drugs, where in the 80s, people who used one particular type of drug got sentenced way harsher than white people using a similar but different form of the drug, right? We had something called public education that says the quality of your school is connected to the value of your home. That where I live in Lower Merion Township, a child's education is worth double the amount than a child who lives in Philadelphia and goes to Overbrook High School, which is less than 2 miles away from my house. Wow. And again, to think about this makes you question your own privilege, right? When it comes to police specifically, right, and law enforcement, there's a thing called qualified immunity, which essentially says, of course, in America, all people are innocent until proven guilty. But in the case of a cop shooting a citizen, they're more innocent and it's harder to prove them guilty. There's this thing, and again, this is not on paper. Qualified immunity is on paper. There's this thing called the blue wall of silence. Anybody who has ever worked intimately with the police will tell you, or they may not, but they know that good cops don't tell on other cops. Ask anybody in the military. They will tell you the exact same thing. That officer was involved in 3 previous shootings. That officer had 18 different complaints filed against him by citizens. 0 disciplinary action. And again, imagine you had a bully and you sent that bully to the principal's office 18 different times. And that bully didn't get expelled. 18 different times. Maybe it's just that guy. Maybe it's just Minneapolis. Maybe it's just 2020. Every person you see on your screen right now was taken by law enforcement. None of the people who killed these other people went to jail. None.
I see some people who have like uniforms on that make that like people who were in like armed forces, like to like kill someone who already helped like the country is just like.
And that's what's messed up, right? And again, this is one of the dangerous things, right? That I've been stopped by the police and I say, look, man, I got a college ID, right? That thinking that if he knows that I belong here, or if he knows that I'm good, or if he knows I own the home that I'm driving to, that he'll treat me differently. But when that person, they probably weren't in uniform. That cop didn't see a former service person. They saw a criminal. I'm also going to point out this face up here. Sandra Bland, some of your homework. To my white sisters here, if you haven't seen the case of Sandra Bland, I need you to watch this and ask yourself, is there an even remote possibility that you would ever be treated the way she was treated for failure to turn on a turn lane switch? Not in a million years. Or the case of this young man right here, and I can't even call him a young man because that is a child. His name is Tamir Rice. He was 12 years old. This boy is 11 years old. This boy was playing with a toy gun. Cops ran up on him, shot him down. And again, cops see a 12-year-old child and treat him like a man. In a state where it is legal for you to carry a handgun in public, out in the open. 12 years old. Years old, not a day in jail. So, they're too young to talk about race. Right? That's what we have said. And here, I'm going to remind some of you of your privileges. Right? And this is an effective use of social media to capture a moment. The day was September 12, 2016. It's the day that me and Natay Hall had to explain the N-word to our 7 and 5-year-olds. The conversation went a little something like this. The context of some random kid at the park and I wasn't there. I heard about it as the kids were running up the stairs in your underwear. I remember that part. You sat at the top of the stairs in your cartoon figure underwear. Sorry about embarrassing you. But that's how young they were, right? They still had cartoon people on their underwear. That's a great point to make. I know you're blushing right now, but that's how young you were, right? And again, I'm making that point to ask them what conversations were they having with their kids when they had Superman on their underwear. Mm-hmm. Okay, you come back on the screen when you're comfortable. All right. So, the bad word scale. If hell and piss are the least painful bad words, nigger is by far the most painful bad word in the English language. The history. Now, I'm going to go through this a little more depth here for y'all in case you're uncomfortable or unable to have this conversation on your own. From Negro to nigger to nigger. Right? The first people who colonized, first Europeans who colonized Africa came from the countries of Portugal and Spain, right? And what is the word for black in Spanish? Negro. Negro. They arrived and said, look at those Negroes. And then they stole them. They stole them. Bring them to the United States, starting around the year 1619. To Jamestown, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Mobile, Alabama, New Orleans, Louisiana. And in the mouths of those Southerners, right, Negro gets changed to nigger. Right? Now, the important thing, or part of the story that school is going to leave out, right, that is not just a name. That word nigger represents the changing of a human being from a human being to a thing, to capital, to a tool, right? That if you have Aetna insurance, that Aetna insured niggers like a tractor. That companies like Norfolk Southern, if you live off of I-95, you have seen Norfolk Southern Rail many, many, many times. That Norfolk Southern transported this capital or these tools, these non-human beings, up and down the East Coast. That when the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, these tools were seen as 3/5 of a human being. And then with time in the 50s and 60s, this term became repossessed by the black community in the form of nigger. Where I can admit that I have used this term with my friends, black and white, to designate them as my brothers. And I know that is confusing. And let me be clear. If you are white, don't ever, 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 ever say that word. E-R or A. When you hear it on the rap song, you can keep dancing. Just skip over that part. Promise? Promise. Okay? Please promise. Okay? And again, different people, right? For example, LGBTQ, right? That Q stands for queer, which was once used as a term, a derogatory term that was repossessed, right? Where people have identified themselves as Q, right? Or that women sometimes who repossess the B word, right? And amongst themselves, right? And again, in that context, I would never, ever, 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 ever use that B word to talk about them. Language is complicated, right? But who's saying it and how it's saying, I know the difference. You know the difference, okay? You want to avoid that mistake, right? Noah, 7-year-old self, cried when I told him about white people using it against me. Right? And again, I didn't grow up in the same country as my father, who grew up in Alabama in the 50s and 60s, where people would say, "Hey, get off the road." Right? But I only heard that word directed to me in sports. Clear as day, 10th grade, playing quarterback, roll out to the right, throw the ball away, get splattered into the opposing team sideline in St. Joseph, Michigan, which was affectionately known to us as St. Johannesburg, Michigan, for some obvious reasons, to which they said, "Get up, nigga, we ain't done with you yet." You don't forget things like that. Right? So they know. What do you do if you're here? Here are the rules in school. And this is how we talk to our kids, that there are different spaces and there are different rules for these different spaces, the 3 S's. In school, you tell your teacher. Then you tell mommy, who oftentimes, we are fortunate, is in the school with them. You tell mommy and me how your teacher responded. In sports, you tell me. Right now, I'm their coach. Right? They tell me we walking off the field. Right? But they also play good old boy sports like baseball, right? Which means they're going to get a different reaction from their coach, I'm assuming, right? But you tell them, and I got your back. On the street, you break his effing nose, tell me, and I still got your back. And again, I know that I'm endorsing non-Quaker-like beliefs and practices there, right? But sometimes the best lesson can be learned from a bloody nose. And I'm teaching my children to protect themselves. Period. I'll explain that to the police because they're going to look at me and they're going to know that they're protected. I don't care. All right. And now I'm about to talk to Remy Martin. Your parents will tell you what that is or who that is. Right? And did I mention that the very next day I was teaching a class on white privilege? And I asked them and I asked you, what did you talk to your children about before they got in the shower when they were 7 and 5 years old? BJ, read that for me.
Noah, age 7. Daddy, are we allowed to eat here? Context, standing in line at Chipotle.
Again, ordering food with a 7 and a 5-year-old is already a difficult enough task. Who wants what on their quesadilla? Somebody wants chicken, somebody doesn't.
Usually for Noah, it's just cheese, but
We know that now, but it took us a while to get there, right? So again, we're standing in line, and this comes out of Noah's mouth. And what does Noah at 7 years old? At 7 years old, he recognized, he doesn't remember this, but he recognized that all the people working in Chipotle were Black. And all the people eating were white. 7 years old. He recognized that. And again, stop lying to yourself. If you think that kids don't see race, don't lie to yourself to think that an 11-year-old kid doesn't see race. Because at 7, he wasn't just seeing race, he was seeing institutional racism, right? He was seeing systemic racism. Because again, didn't no one say, hey, this is a whites-only diner, but he lives in one of the most affluent cities in Pennsylvania. So class is telling them that they can't eat here. Class, also connected to systemic racism, is telling the people who lived in West Philadelphia have to take a bus to come out to the burbs to serve us for their livelihood. And again, you got a moment there where you got to make a decision. Do I deny, deflect, and ask him what he wanted on his quesadilla again? Or do you say, oh shit, let's do our order. And then over dinner, I try to break down for a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, right, how institutional systemic racism, right, explains why jobs left one part of town because jobs went to another part of the country, and that this city is segregated in the way it is because of this policy called redlining. And as difficult as it is, He saw it. And I have to explain it, and I have to re-explain it, and I have to re-explain it. All right? Do you feel this anymore now? You question whether you belong someplace?
So not really, because like I've been around spaces for a long time, but like it takes a while to feel like you're there.
It takes a while to feel like you belong there?
Yeah.
Here's an example where Noah does what he's supposed to do. He tells his teacher that there's a book with the N-word on the bookshelf, used in historical context. The response: thank you for your email. I appreciate you giving me more in-depth look. This is an interesting year, since this is the first year that we teach them about quote unquote real history. We have conversations around all sorts of things that happened to people, the ugly names people were called, how people were treated. We try to be careful about what we explain to them because we are unsure of how much information parents want their children to have and want to respect everyone's feelings. When and if something comes up, we always alert the parents of what was said and how it was handled. We want to be careful of the language of who it is offensive and hurtful to, and those who have never been exposed to it as well. So, A, elementary school history isn't real. We kind of all knew that, right? Remember you hated me for not letting you watch Pocahontas?
Yeah.
Right? You're not watching that shit. That ain't real. That's not real. You can't watch it, right? Want to respect everyone's feelings. From my experiences, it seems that schools are more interested and more committed to protecting white people from the N-word than protecting Black people from the N-word. Think about that for a second.
But can't people at least maybe have the idea of that the N-word really doesn't get used to hurt a white person?
But frankly, it's the parents who are scared to explain it to their kids.
Okay.
All right, so they rather put the blinders on and hope and pray it doesn't happen than to address the monster directly, right? And this leads to reactions instead of, or leads to people being reactive as opposed to proactive. It's done privately, not publicly. Now, knowing our Black Parent Network, and yes, those exist, we put that on blast, right? But the other white parents don't ever find out what other mistakes that white parents made. And I bet you if you knew this, if Johnny had said it, I bet you would think twice about maybe I need to broach this conversation so my kid don't make me look like a racist idiot. But that don't happen. That doesn't happen. Right? And yes, this happened in a progressive place. This is not Southern Chester County. This is not Arkansas, right? This is in a progressive place. Right? So imagine where it would be in less progressive places. So you're sure first grade is too young. The context. He just starts saying it. And what did a kid say to my baby boy? Stop acting like a nigger. We can't say his name. You even remember this incident? You remember that? You don't. I'm glad. All right? And again, it's a long story, but I put this up here as proof. I'm not making this stuff up. All right? Some of the highlights, right? The teacher asked Braden, what happened? What were you talking about before it happened? Nothing. He just started saying it. Asked Braden. Now you remember. Yeah. Asked Braden if he told blank that he didn't like hearing the word. Braden said he did not. He just went to tell the teacher, boom, like he was taught to do. I then asked the other kid if Braden's recount was as remembered. He said yes. He said, I just made it up. And again, I'm an English professor. Those 5 words used in that in that particular order is not just made up. That is regurgitated from somewhere. He says he doesn't know where he heard the N word before. The teacher, who was African American, who wasn't in the room at the time and was heartbroken because she looked at me like I would have never let this, like the look on her face, she was more terrified than we were because she knows that the expectation was for her to protect my kid. Right? I'm gonna flip ahead for time's sake. Right? The part that I want my parents to know. The student apologized again and asked him if he had what he learned in this incident. He said he learned not to use words that he doesn't understand. Both of the child's parents responded that they each had a talk about using the word. They don't know where he heard it, as it isn't a word used in their home, as if anybody would admit something like that, right? They expressed concern for Braden's feelings and hope that the damage can be repaired. And again, I'm so glad that he didn't remember that until I brought his attention. But this is what we mean by silence about racism reinforces racism. Right? That in order for that person, that family to have a conversation like this, it took the psychological and cultural injury to my child to make that happen. That's not fair. That's not fair. And I need y'all to bear a little bit more of that burden. So, some light at the end of this tunnel, right? But as this graphic starts or shows, right, we're just getting started here, right? What does it mean to be anti-racist? And if you're on social media right now, this word anti-racist is flying around like rice at a wedding. All right? But it requires some work. So the first thing I need you to do is I need you to acknowledge and understand your family's privilege. I need you to talk about it. Again, my kids know how much money we make. They know how much debt it took for me to get these fancy degrees. They know how much this house costs. They know how much money their friends make in their parents' professions. And they know the privileges that they enjoy. They know that they go to an independent school whose tuition for the 5th grade costs twice the tuition to attend a year at the university that I teach. They know that they are sitting in class with classmates whose parents can afford to write three times that for every kid for 12 or 13 years. And they know that the only way that they can get into this school is because our executive producer works there. Some people would say that's not fair, that's a lot of pressure. No, that is understanding the privilege, that you got this extraordinary opportunity. You are the children of 2 folks from Kalamazoo in Detroit, Michigan, and you're not messing this up. And you're gonna have to lift some folks up along the way. And it means that you're gonna have to play different roles in your school community. And it means you're going to have to look over your shoulder because your behavior is going to be looked at differently than some of your peers. I need you to talk to your children about the privileges that you enjoy. Now, the hard part about having conversations about privilege is because it brings into question the myth of meritocracy. that our grandfather was an immigrant and he busted his butt. I have no doubts about that. Right? But busting your butt can't help you overcome this thing called domestic terrorism. I'm sorry, we call it Jim Crow. So one of your homework is to do assignment. It's called The American Dream and Nightmare Timeline. It's something that I ask all my future teachers to do. I ask you to make a T-chart. And on one side, I want you to trace the employment, educational, and housing history of your family. And then on the other side, I want you to take note of the nightmares, of the institutional policies that were in place during that time that made the notion of meritocracy virtually impossible. To give you a sense of what I learned in doing this assignment with my students, 2 years ago, I had a young white man whose father or his family came to Pennsylvania, moved out west because they were Christian Dutch Reformed for religious reasons. Then they moved back to West Michigan and bought huge amounts of land that my father in 1994 bought the lot that our home is built on today. That's how small this world is, and that's how crazy this world is. Right? That there are people, there was a student in our class whose the streets on campus were named after them. That there were people in this class whose white grandmothers graduated from Duke University in 1956. It was impossible for my Black grandmother to go to Duke University in 1956. And a hell of an accomplishment for any woman to go get a college degree in 1956. But my grandmother did not have that opportunity because there were policies in place that said, you can't go here. Right? I need you to work and identify and change internalized racism. One of the key parts of anti-racist work is to change your vocabulary. The specific brand of racism that we struggle from is called white supremacy. Part of your work is to stop using the word racism as much and start using the word white supremacy more. And keep track of your feelings of how it feels when that word rolls off the tongue, or more than likely tumbles off the tongue.
I'll interrupt too, Bernard, if you don't mind. A few years ago, when you tried to use white supremacy in a presentation, you were denied the ability to come and speak at many institutions because they didn't want you to say white supremacy.
I wonder why. I'll start the confession that my view of the world, I have internalized white supremacy. That when my aunts, all of which who graduated from Tuskegee Institute now to see Tuskegee University, a historically Black college and university in Alabama, when they said, hey, Bernard, have you ever thought about Tuskegee? Have you ever thought about it? Historically Black college and university? I scoffed at them. Why? Because my education taught me that I was better than that. That I had learned, and I'm ashamed to say this out loud, that I had learned that kind of institution, a Black institution, had to be inferior to a white. That my wife and I got cool because we were the only Black, or maybe we were basically the only Black kids in AP classes. That's how we got cool. So I need you in your homework here, right? Y'all remember those sex ed classes back from the 8th grade, really awkward? I don't know if y'all did this, but my science teacher used to put a shoebox on the front of the lab desk and would allow you to write the so-called embarrassing questions that you had about sex and put it in there, and he would answer it anonymously. What if you replicated that? And instead, but on those pieces of paper, you wrote down the stereotypes or biases that you secretly hold? About times that you get nervous? About a time where you almost could have potentially done something like Amy Cooper did? I see people looking to the phone. Amy Cooper is the Karen who called the police on a black man, right, to weaponize them. And I need you to interrupt racism when you see it at home and in school, and in media and in social media. Again, this has been a full-time job for us. Right? You remember all that Nikki, Ricky, what was that show called?
Nikki, Ricky, Dickie, and Don.
Man, no. No. You're surrounded by whiteness 24/7. No, not 24/7. Where you go to school is white. Where the neighborhood you live is white. The teams that you play are white. No, we had to make a conscious, intentional effort to change the narrative. Watch Blackish. Not funny anymore because
we watched it 5 times.
And you understand that I'm making you watch it more for a social studies class than I am for comedy. Privilege. When I was a kid, you used to have to wait a week to watch a TV show. On demand. See, I still got a lot of work to do over here. Right? But this, I need you to read. And again, this part is going to be uncomfortable. Right? But again, I need you to know that I began by outing my own internalization, right, of these things that I am not proud of. But once I identify them, then I can begin to do something about it. Right? It means putting on things on the TV and not watching them with a bucket of popcorn in your lap, but with a notepad. Watch 13. Watch Just Mercy. And for my kids, I need you to be an interrupter as well. It's inevitable. You're going to see some racist stuff come across your social media timeline, and I need you to out it. And that's the danger about interrupting racism, is the consequences are it costs you relationships. Because I hope I'm wrong, but you're going to hear an uncle or you're going to hear a grandfather say some crazy white supremacist-ish, and you're going to think to yourself, do I respect them or do I push back? Or sometimes even harder, what happens when one of your peers, one of your homies says some white supremacist shit? And then you risk jeopardizing or ostracizing yourself, right, by not putting up with that. And again, I'm a teacher, I'm an old person, I recognize how important it is to have peer groups. I understand how important it is to feel like you belong to something. But I need you to understand that racism is a white people's problem. And it's going to require white people calling out and re-educating and re-loving white people if it's going to get any better. And we need your help. And with that, I need to be quiet and I need to take some questions.
Bernard, there's a question in the chat. I told Dana that this is going to make you talk for a whole hour if you answer a question about white nationalism's relationship to white supremacy.
Yeah. That's the topic of my new book. White nationalism's relationship to, say it again?
White supremacy.
To white supremacy. Yeah.
So, they're interconnected, right? The idea that this country is ours, or I'm sorry, I need to say that differently, that this country is theirs, and that the American thing to do is to take it back from people like me who argue for multiculturalism as opposed to one culture that bonds us together, right? That we need to take our country back from or keep those brown people out of our southern borders, right? Because they jeopardize what is ours, in particular, the English language, even though we don't have an official language in this country for these very reasons. So those notions of white nationalism, whose country this is, and taking it back are deeply entrenched in the notion of white supremacy, right? Because it says that Spanish is less than, it says that queer is less than, it certainly says that Black is less than, and that whiteness is the best, and that whiteness equals American. And I reject that stance.
That was a very concise answer from you. Very good job.
I know you are amazed.
Mm-hmm.
Me too.
You have time for a couple more questions. You went over your time already, so
Who, me?
to dinner. Mm-hmm.
My bad. And we're gonna do some more of these too, so don't feel like you have to get all your questions out, but if there's something pressing on your mind, something that you want me to say or speak to directly to your young people or to the older people, I'll be happy to do that.
It looks like people are jumping off.
Stomach's problem.
When is the next one?
I don't know exactly. I've kind of been obsessing over this because frankly, if I wasn't obsessing over this, I would be releasing my anger and frustration in less constructive ways. So this has been therapeutic for me. And I get to kill two birds with one stone in the sense that I get to empower my kids to let them know or to model for them what it means to be anti-racist and what it means to make a contribution. And I get to help people who want to be better. And right now, this is how I feel is my best way of contributing to this effort. Lord knows that we need all hands on deck. So I need you to figure out, I know that you're here because you're trying to be a part of the solution. That's what I need everybody to do, is to figure out how they can use their talents, their ears, right, and their money to try to be part of that solution. But yeah, there will be another one, I would say probably in 2 weeks or so.
We just been making them up as we go.
Thank you
I
so
wanted
much.
to thank all four of you. I want to thank all four of you for doing this, because I know it's whole family effort here, and that's amazing and empowering. And I think that my kids learn a lot from seeing other kids doing this work.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bernard.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
It was really amazing. Thanks for sharing this with us and your family.
Keep fighting this good fight, y'all, and we'll be back together soon, okay?
Thank you.
Virginia family, good to see y'all. Michigan folks, good to see y'all. Westchester folks, good to see y'all.
And I will see you this fall.
Possibly. Lower Marion folks, good to see y'all.
Thank you.
And the rest of y'all folks, great to see y'all. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Mr.